Well, hello. Welcome to the Charles Cook Podcast. The focus of this podcast is local and state issues here in the state of Tennessee. Um, you can follow my podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, TuneIn, and Alexa. Just search for Charles Cook Podcast. You can also find me on Rumble at Charles Cook 52. And just like and subscribe on any of those platforms, and you'll get notified when I upload new content. The best place to find all those links to my podcast is on my podcast webpage at charlescookpodcast.buzzsprout.com. And there's a link on the webpage where you can actually donate to support my podcast. Just click on the heart icon and you can make a donation. And if you want to contact me about being part of the podcast or you got a show idea, email me at charlescookpodcast@gmail.com. And today, my guest is Bryan Richey. He is a state representative, newly elected state representative for District 20. And I think he's out of Blount County area. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so I think he's going to do what I've heard about Bryan and seen. I think he's going to do a good job at the state level. But Bryan's also got some other things going on that I want to let him have the opportunity to share first before we get into the questions. So, Bryan, tell us what you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me and have an opportunity to have a conversation with you. I served in the Navy, moved around the country between the military and then also with MetLife as a sales director, and kind of got disconnected from a lot of different of my buddies that I served with and from local friends that I hung out with, and ended up seeing the need of that community and that overall reach. And we ended up building out over the last 4 years, building out different companies, and we've kind of consolidated all that. We've got an official launch coming up, and it's a 12 Outdoors, which is an online retail platform. The overall vision is to grow it into being something that can compete with Amazon just in the outdoor space. We're not looking anything inside of brick and mortar as far as for home goods or office supplies, but anything outdoors. And the emphasis on it is putting together veteran events in local communities. So we do have like a club membership. It's $2.20 over there, and those funds right there are allocated to putting together these local veteran events. We had 9 different events this past year, from prairie dog hunts with some veterans out in Wyoming to ice fishing trips up in Minnesota to waterfowl. We had a camping trip here in East Tennessee where we had 17 veterans that ended up showing up. We had tents and campfire, and we just cooked hot dogs and hamburgers and just hung out. So it's real good for that camaraderie component of it. And since then, we've really put a focus on reaching out to other individuals so that we can partner up and bring in even more folks, because I can't be at all these events between running the companies and now being elected for the House of Representatives here in Tennessee. I see the importance of we need to have organizations and businesses that are in the local community that can still put these on, but we can utilize a platform that's beneficial for everybody across the country to be able to have that $2.20 to be able to go to fund that. So that's our newest project, outside of trying to figure out what's happening down there at Capitol Hill, because this is completely new to me. I've never been elected. I ran in 2020 for this seat, but prior to that, I never run for an HOA board, a student council, or dog walker.
Right. So before we move on, if anybody's interested in this project, how do they get in touch with you?
They can just go to 12outdoors.com. So it's just the number 12 outdoors.com. Or like I said, the club membership is $2.20, which has the 22 in there. And anybody that gets the club membership, it saves similar like a Costco, but it's online. If you have the club membership, it takes 22% off of every item on the entire website. And the significance of that is there's 22 service members that are lost every day due to taking their own lives across the country. And that's a statistic that we want to have an impact on and start reducing and hopefully getting it down to 0, but at least getting that number a lot lower than where it is right now.
Right. Okay, good deal. So I hope if anybody's watching that and they're veterans that they can reach out and check this out. Yeah. All right. So one of my first questions for you, as you uh, alluded to there, you hadn't ever run for anything before. So, as for myself, I understand there's things that triggers me that triggered me that got me involved in politics and stuff. So, what what got what was it that got you involved? Why did you decide to run for office?
Well, it was a combination of a couple different things. First thing was we own Whitetail Grounds, which is a deer urine and mineral company. So we ship deer pee all over North America. And in 2019, the General Assembly here in Tennessee decided that they were going to introduce legislation making natural deer urine illegal in the state of Tennessee. And there's the science, and we can get into a real long, in-depth conversation on it. But the long of the short is, out of 99 state reps and 33 state senators, all the legal assistants that are down there, all the other lobbyists and everybody else that's walking in those halls, not one of those individuals contacted me or my company. And when I end up looking at it, there's really only 5 companies across the entire state that sell deer urine at the level that we're at or above. And they didn't reach out to any of those other additional companies. The only companies that have representation up there in Nashville were companies that were not even located in the state of Tennessee. So they essentially made my company illegal overnight, and not one person even called me up to say, hey, what's your opinion on this? So we ended up pulling our company out of the state. We do have just some of the components that take place here, but a lot of the distribution and logistics now takes place outside of Tennessee, because I got frustrated that nobody even contacted me. And the unfortunate part was, it was my state senator that actually introduced the bill. And I was at a local meeting, and there was another individual that was elected rep there, and they said it kind of jokingly, and they said, oh yeah, the P bill. And they were like laughing around. I guess it was the joke up there at General Assembly. But when it took now combined right around $400,000 away from my family, it wasn't a joke to me that they passed this legislation, but to them, they had no clue what the impact was. And when you actually dive into the science of it, it makes absolutely no sense. I've had conversations with TWRA director up there since then. And when I described to them why it doesn't make sense, and why myself and so many other small companies are not in favor of it, and the science and the reason behind it, that was the first time he had ever heard that side of the conversation. So they actually pushed this through the House, pushed it through the Senate, signed it into law, and they had never heard the rational component of it and the true science on it. And their argument is, well, CWD, which is chronic waste disease, could end up really putting an impact or annihilating a deer herd. And what I always share with anybody when I state that is, give me one example of a deer herd across the entire country that has been eliminated due to CWD, and I'll wait for a response, because there's not one. So can it impact it? Yes. Is it something that we need to be concerned with? Yes. But is it transmitted through natural deer urine to the extent that it's going to be even remotely detrimental to the overall population? And it's not. So that was the first part that really got me motivated and geared up for getting involved. Is I'm looking at legislators that are doing stuff and not even contacting their constituents. And then the second part was when I started digging into who my current local, or who my representatives were up there, the House rep and then the state senator that introduced this bill. And he had no clue, nothing against Senator Swan. It was just TWRA handed it to him. He walked the bill forward, unknowingly knowing what it does, or the true impact that it would have. But as I started digging into who those individuals were and their voting record, I was alarmed when I ended up looking at the House rep that I had, because his voting record did not match up with my values, my beliefs, and just what I stand for all the way across. And he had been there for a number of years. Had been there for 6 terms, and then I ran in 2020 for when he was running for his 7th reelection, and then I was able to end up winning the election this time when he was running for his 8th term. But that was why I decided I was like, you know what? Maybe we need to get somebody to run against our House rep. So I started contacting folks to see who was planning on running against him, because I was just alarmed that this individual could run as a Republican and have such a horrible record up there with his votes and the bills that he was introducing. and everybody said, "Oh, nobody will run against him. Heck, everybody loves him, and he's been up there for so long. He was county commission before that, and he is an extremely nice guy." I said, "But that, I don't care how anybody is personally. How are you legislating? Like, how are
Right.
you representing
Right.
my voice? You represent 80,000 people every time you vote yes, no, or you don't vote,
Right.
and on any of those controversial issues or something that would be important to me, he was on the opposite side of the table. So they just kept telling me nobody would run against him, nobody. And I was like, you know what? I ain't got anything to lose. I've never run for anything. I talked to my wife and I said, I think I'm going to run for House of Representatives. She said, what would you have to do? I said, I don't have a clue. I said, but I'm going to figure it out. So I started researching to find out what I need to do. And we pulled our petition and in 2020 to run, and COVID smacked us in the forehead 2 weeks later. So I was not able to go out and knock on doors, but I was able to kind of learn what I needed to learn, what I did want to do again, and what I didn't want to do during that 2020 to kind of get set up. But that was what prompted me or kind of pushed me over the edge. There was a piece of legislation that really impacted my family directly from lack of communication from the General Assembly. And then when I started speaking to the folks locally on who was going to run against him, so I could end up getting behind them and helping them out or volunteering or making a campaign contribution to them, they were like, nobody's going to run. Nobody would step up. And then I heard well, you don't have a chance because you weren't born and raised here. You've only been here for 3 years. This was in 2020, and I've only been in Tennessee for 5 years now. Right. But I was like, well, if I don't win, I'm in the same position I am now. But what I can end up doing is I can have a positive impact on making sure more folks are aware of his voting record. And I think that raised enough eyebrows in between 20 and 2022 from when I ran the first time during COVID to where everybody's eyeballs, and then COVID just expanded on how we were truly being represented. And that set up for this campaign that we just finished up with.
Okay. So basically the facts is you can't beat somebody with nobody, and you got to have somebody to run. So when you were out campaigning and talking with the people in the district, what did you learn from talking to those people?
The number one thing that was overall that was the biggest concern from talking to folks was folks did not feel that their voice was being represented. They didn't feel like they even had a voice anymore, that whether they voted for somebody or not, whoever they sent to go represent them was just going to go do whatever they wanted to go do. I was the first person that knocked on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of doors to where they said, you're the first person that's running for office that's ever knocked on my door. You're the first person that's ever called. And I had a lot of those responses back. Hey, I'm going to vote for you just because you're here and you're talking to me. I don't even know who the current individual is, and I've never spoken with them. So but that was probably the biggest overall overlapping concern, was folks just felt like their voice didn't matter. They felt like they weren't being represented, and that it was somebody else's interest outside of Blount County that was being represented, and it wasn't the actual individuals here that live within 10-15 minutes of me.
So it gets back to basically what you was talking about. The reason why you decided to run is you had representatives right there where you were at, instead of them doing research on a bill and lobbyists coming in from out of state to get them to run a bill. They didn't do no research and didn't even realize that they had someone that had a company in their own backyard that they were affecting. And these people are dealing with the same thing. And when you provide them a candidate, chances are they'll vote for the other guy. So, and you learned that by knocking on the door. So I realize that that you are a hunter, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, I am. You see some antlers behind me.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the Second Amendment? Are you constitutional carry type of person, or how do you feel on that?
Yeah. So my interpretation on the Second Amendment is right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed if A, B, or C is accomplished. I've actually got a piece of legislation that's working towards actually moving that constitutional carry right now more towards being a true representation of what the actual U.S. Constitution is, and where it's the right to keep and bear arms. Because currently the Constitution, I had a conversation with one of the legal staff down there, and I said, "Hey, on this constitutional carry bill that's there," I went, "Can you explain to me? There's a word in here that I know what the word is, but I don't know what the state's definition is, and it's up to me to make sure that my 80,000 people in my district and the other districts are protected based on obscure wording or definitions." I said, "You have the word handgun in here." I said, "What's the definition of a handgun?" And when we pulled up the state's definition, how it applies back to statute, handgun, long and short, the one component that I was really wanting to pull out, it says a gun that is designed to be fired by one hand. And I've shot my shotguns with one hand multiple times. 12 gauges, 20 gauges, I've held onto them and fired them. I'm like, so I went to the website, and on Remington and on Mossberg, I could not find anywhere on their website where it says a shotgun is designed to be fired with two hands, or that common knowledge knows that
Right.
you got your forehand and then you've got your other one and you shoulder it. But nowhere on there does it say that the gun is manufactured to be fired with one hand. And that is what the definition of a handgun in this law is it's a weapon that is designed to be fired with one hand. I said, so I could have somebody that's out there holding on to a weapon, a firearm, gun, whatever it is, that they are shooting with one hand, and in their interpretation, they could end up being in violation of this law because of that word. So looking at taking the word handgun out and putting the word firearm in there, which completely changes it up a lot. There's some other legislation on some of the other Second Amendment stuff that's coming through, but that's my interpretation of it. Is it always drove me crazy when there's age restrictions on being able to purchase a firearm. You can join the military at 17 with parents' signature, but you can't go and buy a pistol until you're 21. You can get issued one to go fight and defend the country, but you can't buy one as a civilian or on the civilian side, which is completely ridiculous to me.
Yeah. So I don't know if you paid attention here in the last week or so, but you've seen some of the, I'm guessing that you've seen on the news that the governor is wanting to basically add a new tax for electric vehicles and increase vehicle taxes. Um, have you seen any of that yet?
I haven't seen any of it coming across. I was actually in Nashville yesterday and the day before, and I was going over what bills have been submitted so far for this upcoming session. And I did not see that right there. That might be an initiative or something that Governor Lee's working on.
I think that's something that he's talking about.
Yeah.
Probably hasn't been a bill filed on it or anything,
Right.
but just kind of wanted to pick your brain. How do you feel on implementing new taxes on people, especially look where we're at with inflation now and everything. It's the last thing that people need is more tax or an increased tax.
Yeah, and I think so. When I end up getting more information on it, I'll have a better understanding as far as what's going on. But my own personal thoughts on it right now is I think the intent of what I have heard through some of the conversations is it's really a tax for the electric vehicles, because we've got the fuel taxes that are out there right now that go towards maintaining that revenue that comes in being part of it goes into Department of Transportation as far as whether it's road system, whatever it may be. This right here is for those electric vehicles that are not paying those fuel charges on there. I don't like the idea of any tax increases, so that's going to be the first hurdle that I'll have to get over. But I do like the concept that whether you end up having a F-250 or you have some type of fully electric, I see the commercial for the new Denali that's coming out, GMC pickup truck that's the fully electric. Both of those vehicles are going to be traveling down the road, but one of them is not paying the fuel taxes in there. So I don't know if it's necessarily a tax that needs to be on the electric side. I have to dig in and have some more conversations on it. I'm not in favor of increasing any taxes at all.
Yeah. I think the news article even mentioned instituting toll roads.
Yeah, I'm 100% against toll roads. I was born and raised in Central Florida. and private road systems is the biggest crock of on the planet, in my opinion. And I can't stand driving through Chicago. Not the city component of it. I don't want to live in Chicago. I lived up there when I was in the Navy, but I can't stand driving up there because you've got $2, $5, and when do they end up in finishing? They're constantly increasing that, and the overall purpose of what they say the purpose of those toll roads is to be able to fund and maintain the roads, or to be able to pay back for the debt that was borrowed to be able to put those roads in, and the construction, the land acquisition, whatever it may be. I'm not in favor of toll roads at all.
Okay. Sounds good. My last question for you is, what is your goal for your first term? What would you think would be a successful first term for you?
So going in the first year, from talking to a lot of folks, something that polls, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, not just in Tennessee, all the way across the country, is term limits. So everybody ends up pointing at the term limits, and we can see what the lack thereof up in DC, the impacts of that with folks that just stay up there for 3-4 decades, and just, if the country's going in the wrong direction, we keep reelecting the same individual. It's because they have the campaign funds to be able to push their message and get in front of you, whereas somebody that's challenging does not have those particular funds. So I think we were able to get term limits in place, but I think it's going to take states. I know that there's a big movement with Convention of the States and trying to hold up a Convention of the States with Article 5 and being able to put term limits there. There's only 19 states on board right now. They've got to get to 33 to even be able to call it, and then I believe it's 42 to be able to ratify it. So it's still a long way out, in my opinion, for that particular avenue of doing a Convention of States. I think what's going to be the most effective way is, that was a concern that I heard as I was knocking on doors, is it's almost the pot calling the kettle black. We've got a lot of elected officials in the state of Tennessee that say they're in favor of term limits and that we need to do something up there in DC, but they don't want you to put term limits on themselves. They want to be able to stay wherever they're at. So I feel that we've got to get term limits across the board here in the state of Tennessee. That's a piece of legislation that I'm working on right now. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to run it as a bill, or it's going to end up being a constitutional amendment. It'll probably be more towards a constitutional amendment that wouldn't end up going into effect for at least another 4 years. So it's got to go through that whole process and let the citizens decide whether they want it. Because as I'm chatting with some of the other elected officials, they're like, well, who do you not like up here? Who's rubbed you wrong? I went, there's nobody that I don't like. I'm like, heck, I don't know any of y'all well enough to form an opinion yet. I went, all I know is from talking to the folks that are in my community, listening to folks that are in other communities as I go around with other, before, when I was going around with other candidates or going around with other representatives, that was a common thread that we hear all the way across, and it polls somewhere in the high 70s, is folks want term limits. And if we're not willing to put term limits on ourselves, why should we continually push and point and say DC, DC, DC? It's kind of like if we back up, going back to 2020, this is one of the things I campaigned on. We had House reps and state senators that have been in office for a number of years, whether they're county commission, they were on the city council, they're school board, they've been up there for a number of years. So there's this vast number of years of experience with elected individuals. And then COVID comes up and they adjourn General Assembly. They pack up and they go hide in their basement like Biden did. And then they leave our first term governor, who had only been up there for 2 years in place. Now, do I agree with everything that Governor Lee ended up doing during 2020 when it came around? No, not by a stretch. But I'm not faulting him, because he had 132 individuals that were in the House and the Senate that should have stayed up there, because they all campaigned saying that they're there to help out the schools. They were there for small businesses. They were there for veterans. They were there for the healthcare system. And the first time any adversity hit them in the forehead, they tucked tail and they went back to their houses because they were worried that this thing was going to take them out. I served and stood on the front line, and I was willing to take the fall for my country. And that's what I feel that our elected individuals should have did back in 2020. And there's a lot of folks across the state that are frustrated at Governor Lee, and it's not his fault. It's the House and the Senate's responsibility to legislate. And they all packed up and went back to the House and said, hey, we don't know what this is. We're just going to go back and keep ourselves safe. And while they were trying to keep themselves safe, they were failing on their promises that they made to their constituents across the entire state. They were failing on protecting folks during that time when they should have stepped up. There were plenty of means and technology to where they could have been meeting even virtual. If they didn't want to meet in the chambers or in those hearing rooms, they could have been in their office in Nashville and just been doing it from there. Right. But they went back to their respective districts. So that was another component. Is I feel that we need folks that are there that are actually going to do what they say they're going to do. And if we put term limits in place, we might end up getting some folks that have a backbone. And I'm probably not going to make a whole lot of friends up there, which is okay, because this isn't something that I ever thought or dreamed about. I'd rather be sitting in the woods, sitting in a tree stand, just watching the sun come up or sun go down. I don't even care if an animal comes out. I just like being out there. It's peaceful. That's when I can connect with God and just be away from everything else, or sitting around a fire with some buddies and just hanging out, or running one of my businesses, hanging out with my wife. We've got 2 school-age kids. Last thing I honestly want to end up doing is spending a lot of time up there in Nashville. So I guess to answer what would be what I'd want to end up getting accomplished is I want to learn a little bit more about what everybody's got going on up there. But I feel that if I can end up getting some type of strategy for putting term limits in place for the Constitution here, for the Tennessee Constitution, to where any elected individual across the state can only serve, for example, 16 years. And I'm open for discussions on whether it should be longer or shorter. I just think that we need to put something in place, let the people vote on it. And if the people don't want it, they don't vote on it. If they do want term limits, which it polls extremely high, they'll vote on it. And now we've got term limits even on if somebody wanted to run for the official dog walker of Blount County, then that person could only be in office for a set period of years because that's what the folks wanted. So that would be my biggest initiative, whether I'm able to do that because of what pushback. But I've got a lot of freshman conservatives that are coming up there with me, a lot of sophomores, a lot of other folks that are senior that have been there for a while that are like, Bryan, that's brilliant. That's what we need. So it's just now it's a matter of seeing if we can get the support as it starts moving through different committees or subcommittees to be able to impact what I'm wanting to do. So that's probably my biggest
term limit.
Number one goal is let's put term limits in the state of Tennessee. Let Tennessee be the leader in saying, hey, we want to have term limits on any elected individual across the state. And then let some of these connecting states start, because all these states do monkey see, monkey do. They're like, oh, did you see what Florida did? Did you see what Oklahoma did? Did you see what Texas did? Did you see what Tennessee did, or whoever? We do it. Now all these other states start implementing it and doing the same thing. And then as more of those states come on board, now we can have a lot more power and momentum to actually do a convention of the states. And I feel that's how we're going to get over that hump so that we can get rid of some of these career politicians that have been up there in DC.
Yeah. One of the things about term limits, and I understand what you're saying, and you term limited your state rep.
Correct.
And that's what the voters really need to be doing. The only negative thing, one of the negative things that I see about term limits is just like we seen when Bill Haslam was in his second term and could not run for governor. That's when he pushed the gas tax increase. Now that Governor Lee is in his second term and can't run for re-election, you see the push for where he's talking about tax increases, toll roads, stuff like that on people that are term limit. When they're in their last term and they know that they can't run for re-election, you really find out where they really stand on issues, because they know I don't have anything to lose. So that's one thing that I see negative about term limits. But these people have been there 20, 30, 40 years. I understand why people want it. So
well, that and a fun fact, a lot of folks, and you're probably aware of this, but there's a lot of folks that are out there that don't realize that here in Tennessee, the Constitution, the governor can serve more than 8 years. They can only serve 2 consecutive 4-year terms. So i.e. Governor Haslam finished up that, Governor Lee came in, if Governor Haslam wanted to run in 2024, he could run back again, and he could run for 2 consecutive terms, and then they have to come out of office again. Somebody else could go in, and then he could come back in and run for another 2 consecutive terms. So we don't have an actual overall term limit component on how many years an actual governor can run. A lot of folks just assume that because it's stated in the U.S. Constitution for the president that it's the same, and it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're a little over 30 minutes now, so
Right.
we'll end this. I've got all my questions in and everything, so I appreciate you joining me. And when we finish up here, stay on the line, and we'll talk a little bit more. But I appreciate you joining me, and I wish you luck in Nashville and in what you do. I hope you represent your district very well and everything, and make those people proud for casting their votes for you. So you got anything you want to finish up with?
Now, appreciate getting to sit here and chat with you for a little bit, and I'm looking forward to going up there and representing the 80,000 folks here in Blount County that are within inside of that imaginary line that they drew around me.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining the podcast. Thank you for watching or listening, whatever platform you're doing it on. And until then, I say God bless you, and we'll see you again on the next one. Have a great day.